It was a quiet, cold morning when the solitary lumberjack, known simply as Eli, received an unusual letter. The letter was old-fashioned, written on rough parchment with a dark red wax seal. Eli, who had lived alone in the woods for as long as he could remember, wasn't used to receiving any mail, let alone a mysterious one. He sat down by the fire, the only warmth in his small cabin, and broke the seal. To Eli the woodcutter, the letter read, "An offer you can't refuse. A goblin slave, trained and ready to serve. A price unlike any other. Come to the old crossroads to see for yourself." The letter was signed with no name, just a strange symbol at the bottom. Eli didn't think much of it at first. He had heard rumors of goblins, creatures of the woods, mischievous and dangerous, but the idea of buying one? That seemed odd. Yet, there was something about the letter that intrigued him. Maybe it was the idea of having someone to talk to, someone other than the trees and the animals. Maybe it was the loneliness that gnawed at him, the silence that stretched for miles. Eli thought for a moment, staring into the fire. The decision was quick. After all, what did he have to lose? He had no family, no friends. A goblin slave might be the only companion he would ever have. With that, Eli grabbed his cloak, tied it around his shoulders, and set out for the crossroads. The forest was dense, the air crisp and biting. As he walked deeper into the woods, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. But he shrugged it off. He had lived alone for so long that his instincts had become dull, unused to anything out of the ordinary. When he reached the crossroads, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was a man, tall and cloaked, his face hidden beneath the hood. Ellie's heart skipped a beat. The man handed him a heavy sack, its contents shifting inside. "Your purchase," the cloaked figure said, his voice cold and distant. "She's yours now." Eli took the sack from the man, feeling a strange weight in his hands. He had imagined something more extravagant. Instead, the sack was rough, with only a slight movement inside. He frowned but said nothing. The cloaked man disappeared into the woods, leaving Eli alone at the crossroads. The sack now his responsibility. Curiosity gnawed at him as he made his way back to his cabin. The further he walked, the heavier the sack seemed to grow. He could hear soft murmurs from inside, as though the goblin, or whatever it was aware of his presence. By the time he reached his cabin, the moon was high in the sky, casting an eerie glow across the forest. Eli set the sack down inside, the firelight flickering on the walls. He stood over it for a moment, hesitating. He had no idea what to expect. He had heard stories about goblins, mischievous little creatures, but never about goblin slaves. Slowly, he reached for the sack's strings, preparing to uncover what he had bought. A mix of excitement and fear swirled in his chest. What would he find inside? The answer was just a moment away. As he pulled the sack open, a pair of glowing eyes met his. Eli froze, his hand trembling. He had no idea what he was about to unleash. Eli sat in his cabin, staring at the sack in front of him. The fire crackled, casting long shadows on the walls, but it couldn't chase away the unease that had settled in his stomach. His mind raced with questions. What was inside? Was this truly a goblin? The legends he'd heard over the years painted a picture of wild creatures, full of mischief and trickery, but this felt different. There was something unsettlingly calm about the sack's shifting movements, as though the creature inside knew exactly what was happening. The eyes, the glowing eyes that had stared back at him when he first opened the sack, still haunted him. They weren't like the wild, unpredictable eyes of an animal or a goblin he'd heard about in old stories. No, these eyes were sharp, calculating, filled with knowledge, as though they had seen things Eli couldn't even begin to understand. The fire flickered and the silence around him grew heavier, pressing in on him. Eli ran his hands through his thick beard, trying to shake the feeling that something wasn't right. He had lived alone for so long that nothing really startled him anymore. But this was different. He had crossed a line by accepting the strange offer, and now he wasn't sure how to take the next step. With a deep breath, he reached forward. His hand hovered over the sack for a moment before he finally untied the strings. As the sack loosened, he felt the air shift cooler, heavier. And then the creature inside moved. It was fast, a blur of movement that startled Eli back into his chair. He hadn't expected that speed. It wasn't like the slow, clumsy creatures he'd imagined. No, this thing was agile. As the sack finally fell away, Eli was faced with a small, hunched figure. Its skin was a deep, earthy green, and its pointed ears stuck out like branches of a tree. It had wild, messy hair, dark and tangled, hanging around its face. But it was the eyes that caught Ellie's attention again, those glowing, intelligent eyes. The goblin said nothing, only tilted its head, watching him. Its silence was unnerving, but it wasn't a typical silence. It felt like the creature was waiting for something only Eli could provide. He had no idea what it could be, but it was clear this goblin wasn't what he had expected. It wasn't the wild, caged animal he had imagined. Eli leaned forward cautiously. You're not what I thought you'd be," he muttered under his breath, still trying to make sense of what was in front of him. He had bought a goblin, yes, but he had been expecting something different, something more submissive, more like the stories told. This creature was aware, too aware. The goblin finally spoke, its voice soft and strangely calm. "I'm not your slave, human," it said, and Eli froze. He hadn't expected it to speak at all, let alone with such clarity. "I'm not here to serve you." His heart skipped a beat. What was this? A goblin that could talk? A goblin with power? Eli found himself lost for words, unsure of what to do next. The fire crackled again, but this time it did little to comfort him. The unease only grew. This was no ordinary creature. Eli watched, frozen, as the goblin slowly stood up, its body uncoiling like a serpent. It moved gracefully, almost as if it were dancing, its every step measured and purposeful. And then it turned to face him again, those glowing eyes piercing through him. "I've been waiting for you," the goblin said softly, as if it had known Ellie's rival was inevitable. "But you haven't yet realized the consequences of what you've done." Ellie's pulse quickened. What had he gotten himself into? Eli sat motionless, staring at the goblin in front of him. The creature's words echoed in his mind, but they made no sense. Consequences of what he'd done. What did that mean? He had bought a goblin, yes, but he wasn't expecting this, wasn't expecting her to speak, let alone act as though she knew him. The silence between them stretched longer than it should have. The only sound in the cabin, the crackling of the fire. Ellie's mind raced, trying to process everything. Had he made a mistake? Was this truly just some goblin he had paid for, or was there something more to her? The goblin's calm demeanor was unnerving. It didn't seem scared, or angry, or even bothered by the situation. No, instead, she was cool, collected, almost as if she had been expecting this moment. Ellie's instincts told him to be careful. He had heard stories of creatures like goblins, causing mischief, but this one wasn't acting like any goblin he'd ever heard of. She wasn't wild, wasn't making any attempt to escape or threaten him. There was something about the way she carried herself that felt dangerous, but also strangely compelling. "I didn't buy you to be some kind of problem," Eli muttered, more to himself than to her. He had no idea what he was doing. The goblin stood there, watching him silently, as if the words meant nothing. She wasn't reacting, but her gaze, intense, unwavering, seemed to pierce right through him, as though she was reading his thoughts. For a moment, Eli tried to gather his thoughts. He had been alone for so long, working the land by himself, with nothing but the trees for company. And now, here was this creature, someone who was not only different from anything he had ever imagined, but far more mysterious. He didn't know how to react, how to even address her. Finally, Eli stood up, brushing the dust from his pants. He had to do something. He couldn't just stand there, waiting for something to happen. "I'm not some fool," he said, his voice a little stronger now. "You were sold to me, and I've paid the price. So what exactly are you here for?" The goblin's lips curled into a faint smile, her eyes glinting with something Eli couldn't quite identify. "I'm here for what you've always wanted," she said, her voice soft but heavy with meaning. "You don't even know it yet, but you're already part of something far bigger than you realize." Ellie's heart thudded in his chest. What was she saying? Part of something bigger. This wasn't just some goblin he had bought to keep him company. This felt more like an entire world of secrets, of unknown forces that were now in motion. And he was in the center of it. Before Eli could speak, the goblin continued. her eyes locking onto his with unblinking intensity. "You think you've found an easy solution to your loneliness, but you've unleashed something far more dangerous than you know. This is only the beginning, Eli. The truth is there's far more at stake here than your life or mine." Eli felt a chill run down his spine. The air in the cabin seemed to thicken, the shadows from the fire flickering more erratically, as though they were alive. What was she talking about? What truth? And what did she mean by danger? He had only just met her, yet everything felt wrong, as if the very ground beneath him was shifting. His mind spun with questions, but all he could do was stare at the goblin, his thoughts clouded by confusion. What had he gotten himself into? Ellie's breath quickened as the goblin's words lingered in the thick, smoky air of the cabin. Dangerous, bigger than you realize. Those phrases churned in his mind, growing louder with each passing second. He had made a mistake, hadn't he? This wasn't just some strange purchase to end his loneliness. This was something else entirely, something far more sinister. His fingers tightened around the rough, wooden armrest of his chair, knuckles white as he fought to keep his composure. The goblin stood motionless, her eerie calmness only deepening Ellie's unease. The firelight danced across her face, casting unsettling shadows that twisted her features into something both beautiful and terrifying. He couldn't take his eyes off her, even though every fiber of his being screamed for him to look away, to run. But there was nowhere to go, not now. "You should leave," Eli muttered, his voice hoarse with confusion and fear. His instinct was to get rid of her, to send her away wherever she came from. But the words felt hollow as soon as they left his mouth. He knew it was too late for that. Whatever this was, whatever game she was playing, it was already in motion. The goblin's lips parted, but she didn't speak right away. She just watched him with those knowing, glowing eyes, as though she was studying his every reaction. Eli shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his heart pounding harder with each passing second. Her silence was worse than her words. "You think you control this situation," she said finally, her voice like silk, but with an edge that sent shivers through Eli. "You think I'm your slave, your captive. But you're wrong. You've never controlled anything, Eli. Not truly." Her words hit him like a slap, making his chest tighten. He had never felt so out of place, so powerless. The cabin, once his sanctuary, now felt like a cage, and the goblin was the one holding the key. "What do you want from me?" he demanded, standing up abruptly, his voice shaking with frustration. "I don't know what you're talking about. I don't understand any of this." The goblin's smile was small but knowing. "You will," she whispered, as if it were inevitable. Then, in one fluid motion, she moved closer to him. The air between them seemed to thrum with an invisible energy. Eli stepped back, his mind screaming at him to escape, but his feet wouldn't move. His body was frozen. The goblin extended a hand, not in a threatening manner, but with an undeniable sense of authority. "You'll see soon enough," she said softly, almost tenderly. "The truth you've been running from all your life is right in front of you. You were never meant to be alone. You were never meant to be just a lumberjack. You have a purpose, Eli. You just don't know it yet." Ellie's pulse raced as the words sank in. What purpose? What truth? He had been content in his quiet, solitary life, his simple existence in the woods. But now, as the goblin stepped closer, his world seemed to tilt, and a new, terrifying reality unfolded before him. Before he could respond, the goblin turned away, her dark eyes flicking to the window, as if she were listening for something. The air seemed to grow colder, and the fire flickered violently, casting long, twisting shadows on the walls. Eli followed her gaze, and for the first time that night, he noticed something he hadn't before, a faint glow coming from deep within the forest, just beyond the tree line. A soft hum filled the air, almost like a distant chant. His skin prickled with unease. The goblin's eyes were locked on the glow now, and for the first time, Eli felt the full weight of what he had just stepped into. The truth was coming, and there was no turning back. Ellie's heart pounded as the distant glow from the forest seemed to pulse, pulling him toward it. The goblin's eyes, dark and full of secrets, never left the light. He had no idea what it was, but something about it felt ancient, like a force much older than anything he had ever encountered. The wind had picked up outside, rustling the trees, but inside, the cabin had grown unnervingly still. His breath felt shallow as he stood frozen, torn between the urge to flee and the strange pull that the goblin seemed to have on him. "What's happening?" Eli finally whispered, his voice barely audible. The goblin turned toward him, a glint of something unreadable in her eyes. "It's time," she said softly, her voice carrying an odd weight, like it was filled with something other than words. "Time for you to understand what you've become a part of." Ellie's mind raced. What was she talking about? Time for what? He felt as though he were standing on the edge of a cliff, not knowing whether to jump or turn back. He had thought this would be a simple arrangement. He'd by the goblin have her as a companion, and that would be that. But now everything had spiraled into something far more complicated, something he couldn't control. The goblin stepped toward the door, her movements fluid and graceful, but there was a strength in them, an energy that made Ellie's skin prickle. Without looking back, she reached for the handle and opened the door. The wind that rushed in was cold and carried with it the scent of damp earth and something unfamiliar. "You've felt it, haven't you?" she asked, her voice low, as if speaking to herself. "The call. It's been there all along, waiting for you to hear it." Ellie's mind spun. The call. He hadn't heard anything, or had he? Now that she mentioned it, there had been moments of unease, whispers in the wind, strange feelings that had unsettled him over the years, but he had always brushed them aside. He had never imagined they meant anything, but now, as he looked at the goblin, he realized something had been drawing him in all along. The goblin stepped into the night without another word, and Eli found himself following her, his legs moving of their own accord. He tried to stop himself, tried to reason with his mind, but it was as though his body had already made the decision for him. He walked through the door and into the forest, the chill of the night air biting at his skin. The glow was brighter now, casting an eerie light across the trees. It wasn't like the glow of a lantern or the moonlight. It was something deeper, something that seemed to come from the earth itself. The goblin moved effortlessly through the woods, her feet barely touching the ground. Eli stumbled behind her, trying to keep up, but the air seemed thicker here, harder to breathe. "What is this place?" Eli asked, his voice rough. "A crossroads," the goblin answered cryptically. "Between worlds. The place where things that should never meet. Eli didn't understand. A crossroads? Between worlds? What did that even mean? His head was spinning, the forest closing in on him as the glow grew stronger. They were getting closer now, and the power in the air seemed to vibrate, making the hairs on his neck stand up. The goblin paused, her back to him, and Eli stopped as well. She turned her head slightly, her eyes glinting with a strange intensity. "There are things you don't know about yourself, Eli, but you'll soon find out. The choice has already been made." Before Eli could ask anything more, the forest erupted in light, and the ground beneath his feet seemed to tremble. He didn't know what was happening, but one thing was certain: whatever he had stepped into, there was no going back now. The ground beneath Ellie's feet trembled, a low rumble shaking the earth as if it were alive. The bright glow in front of him was blinding now, like a sun rising from the very depths of the forest, casting eerie shadows that danced on the trees. The goblin, standing still as if unaffected by the growing power around them, turned to face him. "You don't understand, do you?" Her voice was calm, but there was an undercurrent of something darker, something ancient. "This is just the beginning, Eli." Eli could barely hear her over the thrum of energy that filled the air. The glow was no longer a simple light, it was a force, a pulse that seemed to reach out and grip him by the chest, pulling him toward it. He felt his heart race, his pulse quickening in response to the strange energy. His legs moved of their own accord, stepping closer to the source of the light. He tried to stop, tried to resist, but his body ignored his commands. As though it knew what needed to be done, the goblin watched him with a knowing smile, her eyes gleaming in the eerie light. "You've always had it within you, Eli. You just needed to see it." "See what?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper, but the question was lost in the deafening hum around them. As he got closer, the air grew even heavier. His lungs felt tight, and the hairs on the back of his neck stood up straight. The light was no longer just a physical glow. It felt like it was inside him, wrapping around his thoughts, twisting through his mind. It was as though it was speaking directly to him, urging him forward. calling him toward something he couldn't name. The goblin stepped forward then, her small form looking impossibly large in the light. "You think this is just about me, about the goblin you thought you bought? No, Eli, this is about what's been hidden from you, what you've been running from your entire life." Ellie's head spun as the goblin's words echoed in his mind. Hidden from him, running? What did that mean? He had always been alone, always in the woods, far from the chaos of the world. The truth, whatever it was, felt like it was just beyond his reach, slipping away whenever he tried to grasp it. Without warning, the light flared, and the ground beneath him cracked open. A deep, resonant voice, one that wasn't the goblin's, but seemed to come from the very earth itself, spoke. "It is time." Eli staggered back, his eyes wide with shock and fear. The earth trembled once more, and suddenly, the goblin wasn't the only thing in front of him. Figures began to materialize in the light, shadowy, undefined forms at first, but then they became clearer, tall, imposing figures with eyes that glowed just like the goblin's, their faces masked in an unspoken knowing. Ellie's breath caught in his throat as the realization hit him like a punch to the gut. These weren't just goblins. They were something else, something ancient. He had no idea what he had walked into, but there was no turning back now. The truth was unraveling before him, and with it, his entire world was about to change. Ellie's knees buckled, his body trembling as the figures before him solidified in the eerie glow. Their eyes, glowing with an unnatural light, bore into him, their presence overwhelming. The air was thick with an energy he couldn't comprehend, a power that was both ancient and alive. The goblin, standing beside him now, was no longer just a companion. She was part of something much larger, something far beyond his understanding. "They are the guardians," she whispered, her voice like the rustling of leaves, distant and yet intimate. "The keepers of what should never be disturbed." Ellie's heart pounded in his chest. Guardians? What were they guarding? What had he stumbled into? The questions filled his mind, but he couldn't form the words to ask. His eyes darted from the goblin to the towering figures, their forms like shadows stretching over him, suffocating and heavy. One of the guardians took a step forward, its eyes glowing brighter. It spoke, but not in words. Its voice was a sound, a vibration that echoed directly inside Ellie's mind. "You are the one who has been chosen, Eli." He stumbled back, disoriented. Chosen? He wasn't anyone special, just a lonely lumberjack who had wanted something to ease his isolation. But this was something far beyond that. The goblin, her presence no longer as unsettling, but somehow familiar, stepped forward, placing a hand on his shoulder. "This is your destiny," she said softly. "The moment you crossed into the woods, you became part of this world, part of a much larger story. The power that's been calling to you has always been inside you. You just didn't know how to hear it." Eli wanted to scream, to tell her it couldn't be true. He was just a man, living a simple life. He didn't belong here, didn't belong to whatever was unfolding before him. But deep down, a part of him knew she was right. Something had been pulling him toward this, something he had felt but never understood. The whispers in the wind, the strange sensations that had plagued his solitude, they weren't just coincidences. The guardian spoke again, and this time, its voice was accompanied by a terrible weight, like a mountain pressing down on his chest. "You are not just the chosen one, Eli. You are the key. The time has come for you to decide. Accept your place and unlock the power within you, or refuse and let everything fall apart." The words hit him like a punch, leaving him gasping for breath. A choice. What choice could he possibly make? He was nobody. He had no power. What was he supposed to do with this? What was at stake? The goblin's eyes softened as she looked at him. "You are ready," she said, almost gently. "This is what you were meant for." Ellie's heart thundered in his chest. He didn't know what lay ahead, but the pull of the guardians, the weight of the decision before him, it was all too much. His mind raced, and with a final, trembling breath, he made his choice. It was time to step into the unknown.